Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Off the Record. We've had a great few episodes and it seems like we're getting a lot more feedback lately, so keep checking out offtherecord.fm for new episodes and show notes to keep on track with us. Last week we talked about a bunch of stuff, but the most feedback we probably got was about a discussion about Blink-182 and why I think they should maybe go back on hiatus. I posted a follow-up article on Property Zack called Not Now, It's Time for Blink-182 to go on indefinite hiatus again. It got a lot of feedback. I was surprised I got a lot less hatred than I thought I would. Though there were like a few death threats, but not too many. Not as many as when Ronnie Iraqi and I go to war, which also happened last week. But one thing of interest that did pop up from the feedback was that it looks like Mark Hoppus of Blink-182 read the post, which is cool. I didn't freak out at all, as you might expect from me as a really professional person. I freaked out.
Total lie.
Total lie. I freaked out. But Mark's response was kind of simple. I'm Blink-182 for life, and he expanded that he understands the sentiment, but he isn't going to let that happen, basically. So that's something that I guess that sounds appealing, right? It's a promise, but I don't know. To me, it's like, is that an empty promise or is it not? And so I guess we'll see, but it's at least cool to know for Blink-182 fans that at least 1/3 of the band does not want the band to go away. We'll see about the other 2/3. But to get into our first... go ahead.
It did seem like a promise as much of a passive-aggressive way of saying to the fans, this isn't my fault, please don't blame me.
Tom doesn't want to be there. I do.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it gave me a little glimmer of hope. Not much, but,
nice.
just a little bit. Our first...
I guess the other follow-up is... we finally fixed all our sound issues, so this week should be sounding a lot better than previous weeks. I got a microphone and actually had the time to test it instead of taking it out of the wrapper and starting to do a podcast the first time I used it, so
we're making progress. Good on that. A lot of progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, our first topic this week is what kind of happens when albums leak. On Friday, I think it was Friday, 7 albums leaked in one day. And that's a lot of albums. They were all metalcore genre kind of albums, and they were all semi-related to each other. So in that case, it can kind of be assumed that either some writer or someone that works for a website or publication either got really drunk or dumb or whatever and uploaded all of them, or someone stole them off of his computer or Dropbox folder or whatever. But 7 leaks in one day is kind of crazy. And it's also a terrifying
and the Tigers
thing.
Draw leaked?
Yeah, Tigers Draw leaked as well last week. So I guess there's a few different sort of things to talk about. The outlet side of it is potentially most interesting to me just because of Property Zack. So whenever we see any website that we're, friends of or acquaintances with go through like a leak situation, it's always like a very scary thing because it's like, wow, that could have been us. And, when most leaks happen, I would say from people that I know, like they're often just accidents. Something shitty happened and it's not necessarily totally under your control. You probably could have been smarter, but the intention is rarely there to cause harm. And then the other side is kind of like what you do in the case of as a band or a manager as a label when your album leaks. Jesse has a really great story about the Real Talk release from Man Overboard that I think is a good way to kind of start that discussion if you want to share your 4-year-old concerns. 5-year-old? 5 years? 4 years? Where are we at? 4 years. 4 years.
4 years, yeah. It's 2010. So, at the time I was managing Man Overboard, it was right before Real Talk came out. They had one compilation full length and a couple EP releases. So they developed enough of a fan base that there was a lot of people while we were in the studio, like, literally saying out loud on social media that they'd like to get a leak of that record. So we decided to only send it to under 10 trusted outlets. and like people we were good friends with that were writers at the time. And sadly, one of them was hitting on some girl who ran a blog and gave her a copy, and she uploaded a song to her Tumblr. So I saw this, and I was on my way to a date, and I had one of those little netbook things, and I got online, and I start messaging her and trying to get her to not post any more songs, and I have to cancel a date while I'm sitting in Union Square on a laptop, and so she doesn't post much more, but then we basically decide we have to have a plan for this record leak, and I say, for about 3 years at that point, I'd been writing on Musformation about how ridiculous it is that labels ignore leaks and don't make the most of them, and particularly there was like a Thrice record. I want to say it was the one like Vince You or however you say that one.
Well, yeah, but Beggars, maybe that leaked, but Beggars is the one.
That was the one that did.
Yeah, Beggars leaked like 3 months early.
Leaked. Yeah, it was like 93 days or something insane. And they basically just ignored it. And I was like, this is not the way to do this. And I'd written a lot of articles about this. And I told Jeff and the band, I was like, if this leaks, let's put it up on Bandcamp. Like, I'm going to upload it to Bandcamp. I'm not going to hit publish. And the second we think it leaks, we're going to hit publish. And I bet you we're rewarded for it. And sure enough, that was the case, is when it leaked, which I want to say was a month before.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, my memory is not what it was. But so sure enough, we have so many people who say to the band, I never heard this band before. I don't really like them, but I'm going to buy this to support other bands doing it. And we got so much good press off of it. We were featured in crazy big websites like Tech Dirt, and there's even a link to it in a Time magazine article at one point about 2 years ago. It was really crazy about how much support you get when you treat your fans with respect and you harvest that enthusiasm for your fans. Because what I always thought of it, and the reason I was passionate about this, is I would have a really bad moral qualm when I want to support a band, but I'm now seeing 20 people Facebooking and tweeting about how good this record is, and I want to listen to it. But I also want to listen to it in the quality a band meant for me to listen to it in. I also want to support the band. So I didn't want to have our fans go through a moral quandary at all. So this worked out great. And since then, Jeff from Run for Cover has done this anytime one of his album leaks. But it's funny is that a lot of these labels still sit and try to maintain the illusion that their first week numbers are going to get just so destroyed by doing this that they just don't adapt to it. And I kind of think it's a little ridiculous. And I think one of the other smart things that we've seen over time is that some of the labels that do it, they also even discount the price a little bit so that you really aren't having a bad moral quandary. And they, I think so much of managing and what you do in the music business is like this principle and stoicism that you take a tragedy and you turn it into opportunity. And this is the perfect example. And it's amazing to me that we're still discussing this all these years later and watching labels just ignore these leaks like they're nothing.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing to me. And so I just checked online, and it looks like Real Talk leaked on June 24th, and it was supposed, and the release date was July 19th. So it leaked about 3 weeks early. So to me, like what you were saying just a minute ago, there's sort of this practice in the music industry for managers and labels. And the one end I feel like is, oh, we're going to like take advantage of this situation. And the other is, we're just not going to do anything because that kind of scares us. And that second part, kind of like what happened with Thrice, is something that's so confusing, especially today. And we still see it. If your album is leaking over a month early, and let's say it's like, God forbid, 2 months early, and that just sucks, right? Like most labels, unless it's someone that's flexible, truly like a Run for Cover, they hate changing. It's a huge frustration, right? Like you have to change everything, but it's worth it long term. The one really good example I can think of a label that changed their leak, like a strategy when an album leaked, was Epitaph last year with Bring Me the Horizons record. It was supposed to come out something like April 30th, and it leaked in February. And they moved it up a full month, and they couldn't do it any sooner because of vinyl and all that other stuff, but they moved it up a full month, and it still debuted with somewhere, I want to say around 30,000 albums sold the first week, and this was with a 2-month early leak. And that was great. Like, props to Epitaph for doing that. They did a really, really great job. And it's because it was such a major release that they probably felt the pressure to say, wow, we can't afford doing a disservice to the band and to the label, you know, and I thought that was great. But then you have albums like the most recent Circus Survive and Say Anything albums where they leaked early and they were just ignored. And often when that happens, I think it kind of just takes the wind out of a release, especially if it's not loved, right? So like the last Say Anything album, Anarchy, My Dear, leaked 2.5 months early. No one acknowledged it. I remember doing an interview with Max right after it leaked, and I brought it up, and he was like, hey, like, can we try to not talk about that? We don't really want to acknowledge the leak. And I was like, sure. But it confused me so much because the conversation about the album took a really bad turn because a lot of people didn't love it. And because they could hear this whole thing at once, and everyone basically just wanted to hear the album so they could make a decision about it. And everyone listened to it, and it was shitty quality, and everyone was like, you don't like it. And then that set the tone for the album until it came out 2.5 months later. And then by then, a lot of people had given up on it, you know? And so that's one thing, and that's just so frustrating to me. It's like, especially when it's a really bad quality rip, it's like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah, I know. I remember with like the Under Oath thing with what was it, Define the Great Line, that the rough mixes leaked first.
Yeah.
And you know, it was that's just horrifying. And you know, you don't want your art judged on by something that is not finished. But I think that's the other thing that we have to acknowledge is that every day that an album's out there as a leak is another day that, you know, hundreds of fans are sending it to each other to say, what do you think of this? And you're losing opportunities to sell. And I think what's another interesting facet to this is like, so when do albums not leak? So there was like this big thing that I actually haven't seen written about a lot of places. But like, you know, for years, there was an employee of a New Jersey record store who I'll make nameless because they haven't been like prosecuted in a court of law or anything. I don't want to get in trouble for slander, but it was very proved that this person had this insane ratio on a torrent site because they were so for people who don't know with record stores often get the Tuesday releases on Friday so that they're positive that they're in on time.
Right.
And this person was unboxing, even though the boxes often say, do not open until Monday at midnight or whatever. And they were unboxing them and uploading them to What CD. And so What CD is a private torrent community for the particular nerds that really, really want these releases in advance. But yeah, that's like a crazy, crazy thing. And so you see that it's very rare that a lot of releases weren't leaking by at least the Friday before. So at least the weekend before everybody had it. Now, I should also say this, as somebody who bought a lot of records in a pre-internet era, I got a lot of CDs 3 days early back in the day because they wouldn't think the CD meant anything. So, for example, I got Weezer's Blue album on the Friday before it came out because everybody's like, oh, whatever, this is just some inconsequential new band. But, you know, I was the first to have that of like anybody I knew because it just happened to be on a shelf because they didn't care about stocking it because they didn't think anybody was running to the store to get it. So
right, yeah, and so
I think that's one of the things is you're always seeing a leak happen now.
Yeah, and there's so many different scenarios, and again, there's so many great and a bad, like great ways to improve on a really poor situation, and it's just so mind-blowing when labels or bands don't do it right. Circus Survive is another good example. Last year, their album Violent Waves leaked something like a month early, and nothing changed. They didn't do anything about the release date. But the craziest part about that to me was that they were independent. They didn't have a label. It was all on them. They could have done whatever they wanted, you know. They could have put the album up that day for $5 on Bandcamp or something like that, and they could have said, "Hey, we're trying this thing where we're going to be we're labelless. We need your support. Someone leaked this album. Support us, please. This album leaked over a month early. It's supposed to be a huge step for our career, you know." And instead, they didn't say anything, and it wasn't, and it just was there for a month. And a band like Circus Survive, they're similar to Say Anything in that they have a cult fan base, but at the same time, when you have truly no strings attached to a label or something like that and have your freedom, it was kind of confusing to me that they didn't flip the switch and say, hey, like, come buy this now, we need it.
Well, I think what's interesting on that side of it, though, too, is, you see so many bands now, especially that are kind of going on the, like Circus Survive did, like we're not going to have a label anymore, we're going to do this ourselves. A lot of the bands are seeing this as, well, we don't care if we profit from the music as much. Let's just make sure it's out there. And however they get it because we're really trying to sell merch and touring.
Right. I don't know.
So
there's
who
still
really cares how they get it?
Yeah, and I guess if you think about that way, and like if you're the band and that's your prerogative, that's cool. It's just like you're basically losing. You're just losing money to me, and that's why I think Run for Cover is the best label at handling leaks. And I guess that did start, like you were saying with Real Talk and with Tiger's Jaw last week. It leaked a week or I guess 2 weeks early. It was like 1 a.m. They put it up for $5 download, and it becomes a huge story because Absolute Punk and Property Zack and All Press, we all post about it and we say, Tiger's Jaw album leaked 2 or 3 weeks early, buy it for $5 now. And then the text of the post say, hey, support Tiger's Jaw and Run for Cover. Get this for just $5, and that boosts sales because then Tiger's Jaw jumps to the top of the Bandcamp charts, and then they potentially get new fans as well. And so to me, it's just, like maybe that was a revolutionary idea 4 years ago, but now that's like free for anyone to take, So it's so confusing when all these smaller labels, like, because I feel for a label like Hopeless or Epitaph or Rise, like it's going to be harder to get them to sort of shift to be looser on how they handle leaks. But when you're talking at the Run for Cover and No Sleep top shelf area, if labels don't do that, then you're kind of just missing the point, I think. And it's a good way to get others to support your label and your bands too if they've never heard of you, right? Like that helped so much, I feel like, with Man Overboard. They got credit.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about it, the amount of press that we got for that did good things for the band. And also, for a band that like kind of was like not always getting the respect they deserved because of their lyrics being so playful and childish, like it kind of actually gave like a bit of like punk rock DIY ethic respect in some communities that I was kind of shocked about. And that stuff is important when winning over kids to try out a band and listen. That's going to kind of be like some, asshole kids' guilty pleasure, quote unquote.
Totally. And then you get people that like, I guess more like us, I would be like, wow, that's really smart. Like someone like, that's a good team. I'm going to give this band a chance now because I just think they're smart. And, you can't, maybe that's only a few people in the relative fan base, but if you're a band that does that continuously, you're going to get a lot of fans like that over time, and that's going to result in money, and that's going to result in your livelihood at the end of the day,
And obviously those few people who respect that usually are also the few people that are followed by a lot of people who then tweet out what they like and share what they like and influence other people. And, getting those people on your side is an important step.
Yeah, or just talking about it on a podcast.
Yes.
That's probably a good time for our first sponsor break. Joining us once again is Limited Run. Limited Run is an easy to set up direct-to-fan solution for labels and artists. If you want to sign up, go for it, and you'll be selling within just a few minutes, and you'll have all these great options like cart limiting, digital street date solutions, and physical and digital bundles and more, and you can set up PayPal and credit card options alike. Sales reporting is one great feature of Limited Run. They show your charts and sales in an easy to read graph at a glance, and you can see what you sold yesterday or a week ago, all in your time zone, and it splits stuff up great in terms of gross profit and then profit without shipping and all of that. We use it all the time for Bad Timing Records and also for Knuckle Puck, and it's just a really great way to see how your store is doing. Thank you once again to Limited Run. Check them out at limitedrun.com.
It's another cool feature that I think people overlook of them that you and I and Thomas from Bad Timing were talking about this week is that you could upload a master quality wave at 1644-bit, but then any of the customers can also choose which quality they want. And I think that that's such a good thing to have because everybody has their audio preferences these days. And I think that gets overlooked so much that because I see how often bands upload MP3s or AACs instead of the full quality so that they're nerdy fans can get really a great copy of the record if that's what they want for their library.
I agree. Actually, Thomas and I sort of we all stumbled upon it by accident. We had never. We have a release coming out soon, and it's our first release that really includes digital as well as vinyl, and so that's the first time we had uploaded digital files to Limited Run, and we were just stoked. We were like, wow. They did another great thing. Surprise. Not really.
Yep.
Yeah, great,
Totally.
great company. So for our next topic, I guess we can just call it being multifaceted in the music industry. I talk a lot about it with a lot of different people, and I think a lot of people within the music industry talk about it with a lot of different people. It's just sort of having 3 jobs, let's just say, that equal the paycheck of one normal human's job. And that, that can include the stress and the benefits and the failings of 3 jobs separately all into one. So it's just triple the stress. I guess you could look at it that way. I guess, though, you're a pretty good example. Has it always been that way, Jesse, for your whole time in this?
No, I have to say there was a lot of years that I just produced records, but I was also not under the adult burdens that I am now of insane Brooklyn rent prices and fun things like that. And, I'm not 26. I'm not under my parents' medical insurance anymore and stuff like that. And so there was a couple years that, producing could get me the money I wanted. But, I also always had other aspirations, too, is like, I think that's the one thing is that a lot of motivated people, they say, let me take on a couple different things because I want to just keep doing things that challenge me. But it is the thing of that, I run a very busy recording studio. I both produce bands. Almost a third of our business is mastering now. And another about 1/6 of it is me just mixing bands that record themselves. And so that's kind of like 3 different hats in one in that. And then, for years I managed bands. I don't do that anymore. And then obviously I write books on the side as well. And I think that there is a thing of that. Sure, there are people who can get a job that pays well enough for whatever their means are, but there is growingly a thing of that, if you're not spreading yourself out a bit, you might not have the steadiness because also some of these checks get really weird. If you're managing bands, there's certain months if the band isn't touring or putting out a new record, or never mind if they're a really slow-paced band, imagine when you're managing a band that gets to a point like Brand New where you're going years between records, you have to have a lot of bands filling in that gap to maintain some steady income because your landlord's not going to go, oh, cool, I didn't realize that they're not putting out a record for the next 2 years. It's cool. You can pay me when you get that big check 3 months after the record comes out.
All right. So do you think a lot for you, I think what you said about just sort of you're now getting more into just mixing and mastering, and that's eating into, I guess, the pie graph of, I guess, what your income looks like. Do you think a lot of that is just sort of reinventing what you do? And, I don't know how to necessarily phrase it, but sort of
adapting.
Yeah,
I think you're saying?
Yeah, adapting, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I made a very conscious decision, and it wasn't even a decision I had to, straight this up, but, I do believe in the home recording thing and that bands being at home can sometimes harness their creativity. I also know that recording with a good producer can teach a band a lot and let them see the way towards things and get them better. But if a band chooses to fulfill their vision at home, I was on a panel 8 years ago, and I was the only one who said that was a good thing, and that shocked me. But it's paid off, and, I enjoy doing it. And, there's part of me that really likes doing it, too, because it's usually unattended work, and I can kind of stroll in at 3 p.m. if I want to walk a dog of a neighbor's or something like that for a while and go grocery shopping in the middle of the day, and I can just do it when I feel creative. And I like that a lot. But I do think that there's a lot of this that, there's also the thing of adapting is that if you're somebody who's used to making $120,000 a year, you might not start to need to have something that's your steady startup job or your consulting gig on the side of the bands you manage.
Totally. And so I've been getting myself into that situation now. I've been in college for 3 years. I started doing the website when I was a junior in high school. And obviously, I sold Property Zack to Buzz, now Spin Media, in freshman year of college. But I had a really nice gap, and I guess we talked about this last week, where to me, like, what college should be if you want to get into like this overarching business is that college should be sort of this purgatory period where you get everything done as much as you can in order to be able to make the salary you would like to have once you graduate. And so I didn't really think about that the first 3 years of college. And now that I'm sort of winding down my junior year, finals next week, I am in a spot where it's like, oh, I need to make money. Money is, you have to live. It's like, and that's not I've been really fortunate with my family to not need like a shitty whatever kind of job like at a Wawa, let's say, or at a 7-Eleven, whatever, to get that kind of money. But at the same time, I do, like everyone else, obviously need to make money after I graduate. So I've been in a really interesting and different mindset lately of just thinking like, well, in a year, once I graduate, how are these different jobs that I do going to piece together? Are they going to make for a great salary, or are they going to make for a normal human salary that works a normal human job, or a little less or a little more? I don't know. But balancing Property Zack and the label and management, those are all sort of fluctuating things. Like you were saying too, it's the site could have a really great traffic month next month, and that could make the few months after it have a higher income. But then what if we sort of nosetail and just steady out, a quarter less than what we're doing now for monthly traffic? Then our ads are going to hurt. And what if, like you were saying about brand new, like the bands I manage, they either slow down or break up, or they're not really functioning at a level that they might be functioning now at. Like, that's lesser income too. Or what if with the label, and Thomas and I at this point, we're not like, the label is not a job for us in the sense that we're not commissioning money from it. We just want to make the label as great as it can. But one day it would be awesome if the label could pay us and be our livelihood. And that's obviously a dream, but maybe that could be a reality one day. But still, what if the label kind of self-destructs too? And that's a really, like, I guess, dark outlook on life. But I feel like that happens all the time. There are all these jobs that at one point could be really great, and they're all separate incomes from each other. That's really nice. But at the same time, there's so much inconsistency just with what we do that it's kind of a scary thing. And I feel like it's necessary, though, to have more than one job, unless your job is ultra secure, right?
Yeah. And I think that this is like also like one of those things, like, I have this like joke list for a book I'm going to like make one day of like what they didn't teach you in music school that they really should have, or in music business school, I should say, and music school. But like, everybody has bad months, no matter what these are, if you're in a commission type business. And you can't get just used to the good ones. Like, one of my favorite stories is Steve Albini, who produced Nirvana's In Utero, obviously a huge record. He didn't work for months after that because everybody thought he was too big for them now. So all these bands that normally would have called him were like, oh, he's too expensive, but he was charging the same rate. And then he has a slow month. And then I'm friends with a million producers. And, you could be having such a hot record, like, some of the hottest points in my career, all of a sudden there's 2 weeks with like very minimal work. And you're like, what happened? Or, at one of the hottest points in my career about 10 years ago, I was booked for 9 months, but then all of a sudden the drummer of the band I was supposed to start in 3 days got a hernia right before it. So now I'm out of work for 4 weeks because that band had booked a month. So yes, I can keep the deposit, but the deposit's only a quarter of the money I was supposed to get. And so then I have to pick up some bands and all that fun stuff. And there's so many things like that. If like you're a booking agent, the band cancels a tour, that's a lot of commissions down the drain, or even a loss if the venues are asking for certain stipulations in your contracts. There's so many variables of how this stuff works that, like finding a couple things so your income isn't always resting on this is super, super important.
Yeah, and I guess this kind of fits in well. Last week, a writer named Luke O'Neill published he's a freelance writer, so he writes for so many different places, Noisy, Alt Press, Boston Globe. The list is really long. But anyway, so last week he kind of went on a Twitter rant of being like, you can get paid well as a freelancer, and he's a writer. And so that's a really, that connects really well, I think, probably to you in terms of recording, because, hey, there might be work this month, there may not be next month. And it connects well to me because of the website. And so he said very bluntly, like, I made 60 grand in 2013 from freelance writing. And people were shocked. And I was shocked too. And I thought, wow, that's kind of fucking awesome, you know? And then he went as far to publish what he basically got paid for each kind of post he made on each publication. And that publication list was about 15 deep. And it was just bare bone information, but it gave a really good look of what it's like to be a freelance writer. And it opened up a long conversation of like, well, one, should he have even posted it? But beyond that, because that's not really interesting, just more of like, that dude has to work his ass off to get paid from 15 different places, you know, and that's hard work on top of actually making quality writing, so those places will hire him. And you know, I just think that shows that maybe more than in other fields outside of music or writing or recording, that like the drive needed has to be so crazy, because you really need to be hungry for the work you're getting. It's very rare, and I know very few people that just sit in an office all day and know that they're going to make this much each month, or that they have health care or something like that. And so I feel like, and I'll put this in the show notes at offtherecord.fm, but you know, I thought it was really cool that he sort of went through like, hey, like, this is how my life looks now, and it's actually going pretty well. I may make more in 2014, but you can do it too. And I think that's important, because I guess, you know, it can definitely be intimidating and worrisome.
Yeah, and I think like there's another aspect to this too that's really interesting. So like, you know, I'm a decade and a half into not having ever had to like go back, like, you know, I think like 15 years I did Guitar Center for 2 days, but like I'm about 16 years into not having had a real job. And there was a point like, you know, I was to make the money I needed to make and keep growing my business, I was working 300 days a year. I was never taking off any days off. And I got really bad fatigue. I got burnt out. And, you know, there was the year I made the most amount of money. My career is going great. There's bands flying over from like Belgium, and I'm doing bands from Japan all the time. The next year, I got so burnt out, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I got sick for a month, had no medical insurance. And I made the least amount of money I made that year because I basically was so exhausted I had to do as little work as I possibly could for a while because I was so burnt out from it. And that's another like crazy aspect of it. This is like we're talking like, well, do you need 3 jobs? It's like, well, that takes a hell of a toll. And never mind, like, you know, for that guy, Luke, like, I don't even know how you get inspired to write that many articles. Like, I can't personally find that many things that I find something interesting to say. And there's times that I aspired to write that many articles. And, you know, there's just, to me, it's like, I think maybe I'm getting old and I'm like, okay, I've heard this before for 20 years. You know, I've read the Are You a Sellout art debate for, you know, since I was 15. So that's 21 years that I don't really find that interesting topic to take on anymore. But like, it's crazy to get that, to find the balance of, how do you do all this and not get burnt out? How do you work these million hours and stay happy?
Yeah, that's a really good point. The sort of just fatigue and exhaustion of sort of working yourself to death. Last year, one of the podcast networks I listened to, 5x5, they did a show called The Frequency, and it was a daily show. And the host and the founder of the network, Dan Benjamin, so he was recording the show every day while also recording 5 to 10 other shows a week and also being the like head of the company. And his job is to literally have a voice, right? Like, he is the voice of the podcast network. He is on probably half of the shows of the network. And he worked himself into the ground so hard that he basically like didn't have pneumonia, but he was in bed for a month and he couldn't speak. And that's his job, you know, and his job is to speak. Yeah. And so, you know, he wanted to grow his company and he wanted to make his dream come true, or however you want to spin it. And it, you know, he went too far. He overworked himself because of it. And there were massive consequences. And that's really definitely something to worry about. Like right now, even like I'm definitely feeling run down for the first time in a while. And I think I basically just need to get out of school for the summer. But, you know, it's still, you still start to feel it. Your mind just isn't as snappy as it was before that exhaustion sets in, and of course, if it's a physical thing, then you'll feel that in different ways, but sometimes it can just be that your mind is a little too tired right now. And our minds are pretty important for the jobs we do. So there's definitely there's definitely a balance, but finding that balance can take years. It took me years, after I almost had like a very near life death thing with a peanut allergy, to realize like, oh, I should do the website differently from how I've done it the first 2 years, because I have no life outside of it, and it's really like screwing with my personal relationships. So I took a step back, and then I reevaluated my balances, and everything's a lot better now. But I feel it. I've found, at least with other people too, it usually takes some kind of unfortunate incident for people to be like, "Oh, I need to do this better," and I think that's probably always how it's going to be.
Yeah, no, I mean, as somebody who's been, doing that since I was your age now, and now been doing it for another 16 years, it's like you're always reevaluating. Like if I tried to work 300 days a year now, I literally would die, because at 36, and I'm in, I exercise daily. I'm in great shape. I eat nothing but organic food and juice every day, and I'm a total health freak. But that's how I get all these things done. And I never sleep less than 8 hours unless I have a real bender or something and party a little too hard, maybe once every 3 months. But like, you learn what you can and can't do as you get older, and you have to learn how to take care of yourself. And it's even down to simple things. It's like you're talking about, like, you have no social life. Like, if I don't take long walks every week, my mind gets cluttered and I feel weird. I learned I have to be alone for a certain amount of time every week. I learned I have to be around friends, or else I feel lonely and crazy, and that eats into my emotional work at work. And, you learn how to take care of yourself through all this. But what's scary is that, you also want to pursue your dreams and be happy. And so, like, to get to the bigger thing of, like, that year I made the most money of my life, I also went, I was really unhappy, because all I ever did was work. There was from September to December, I had only had a half day of work off at a time ever. And I wasn't happy. So I changed how I was. I decided to make less money the next year and just like try to reevaluate things. And I made just enough to get by. I didn't go crazy. I'd had a lot of money in savings, and I blew through that while I tried to figure it out. And now I have a good life balance, but it took, really being really, really run down to make that change.
Yeah, the balance point is different for everyone, right? And like I take walks every day too, because I get to think on my own or listen to a podcast or music or whatever, and that's how I get to think. But not everyone does that, and someone else has something else to do, and that's kind of the most important thing, figuring out what that is for you, I would say.
And it's funny too, because like I know about you and I, we have friends of ours who are like, those guys are crazy. I can't believe how much they do. Where are they thinking starting a podcast? Like, they already do so much. And like, Dave Shapiro is somebody famous in the music business. Everybody's like, how does he do all that? He books 3 million bands. He has a label, da 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 da. And some people can do this. You have to find your balances. I don't think you necessarily have to do 3 things, but it's also something to consider, that you need to have those angles of income.
Yeah, it's going to be different for everyone, but you just got to do it.
And one of the other secrets I think that's also really funny is a lot of people, so there was a big band that, literally probably had one of the biggest indie records of 4 years ago, and I worked with them on a benefit, and I'm talking to the manager. I was managing bands at the same time. I find out this guy has a day job, like literally like in advertising, and he's managing a humongous indie band on the side. And I think that's the funny thing too, is like, I think a lot of people have a vision of like, well, you're managing, and managing a band that's blowing up is a full-time job and can take up 6 hours of your day at minimum. But some people find a way to also do that with this, to maintain a thing, and that might be what you have to do for a while until you just can't do it anymore. Like when I hit the point with when I stopped managing Man Overboard, it was very much like at the edge of, I'm going to have to either quit producing or quit managing bands, because it was just trying to do both jobs wasn't working anymore.
Yeah, and that's a scary thing for me, I guess. Like at this point, I handled everything really well, and I definitely slip up with priorities every once in a while, but it's like, how far can you push your limits? I went before I switched over to this management company, Synergy. I went to speak with one of my teachers who runs a record label, and he was like, I just kind of take on stuff until I hit my breaking point, and then it's very apparent I hit my breaking point. And I was like, I guess I don't know if I want to do it that way though, but I don't know that there's really another option for me. And so I have not hit that breaking point, and I hope not to. But it's definitely like I may have to pick one day kind of thing, and that can be a scary thought too.
I had to do those picking. About 10 years ago, I had worked at a radio station called WFMU since I was 17 years old, and I eventually got so busy with producing. So WFMU is an almost all volunteer staff, and I just went, while I love this job, I can't volunteer anymore and do this like a bunch of days a week and drive for 30 minutes each way, then record a 30-minute session, come back, and then do a 10-hour session anymore. And the same thing, I used to write for Tape Op magazine, and I just said, these interviews and articles I do just take too long. And, while that paid, it was just like, it was too much for me to do anymore. And I had to say no. And I sadly have never seen anybody who doesn't make their decision by that. At some point, they just go, this is too much. Whatever I like the least, or whatever I believe in the least, or whatever isn't paying has to go.
Yeah. And that's probably the smartest way to do it at the end of the day.
One of those three.
Yeah, one of those three. So we are sponsored also once again by Card Included. Card Included is the only self-serve download card service around. For just a few dollars, bands and labels can secure large amounts of download cards with no sign-up necessary. Upload your music and logos, and just be ready to cut out some download cards and stuff your vinyl with them. And cards can include and collect information about who is downloading that music as well, so you can better plan for touring, where to go, where not to go, and much more. It's really simple to use, and I highly recommend it. Go to cardincluded.com for more, and thank you for sponsoring Off the Record. I guess Apple bought Beats.
Yeah, the Beats finally put up a blog saying that they were purchased by Apple, and there's a nice picture of Jimmy Iovine, Dr. Dre, and
Tim Cook and Eddie Q. Yeah. And so the price tag was $3 billion, which was $200 million less than the rumor. It's not clear if that number detracted because it was wrong in the first place, or maybe Apple got $200 removed because of a drunk Dr. Dre video that appeared on the internet. But
also they got like a bunch of lawsuits thrown at them immediately. Like, let's remember Beats was bought from Mog, and the CEO of Mog is now suing Beats for unpaid royalties. So they definitely got some legal trouble. I think it's easy to believe that Apple decided the valuation should go down a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And so the purchase overall, though, I think it kind of went over really well. I think the 2 weeks of sort of rumor mills made everyone come up with their own theory. And I think everyone mostly was happy with their own theory because it was basically, this is what we think should happen. And so Apple finally came around, and in a very Apple way, they were just kind of like, hey, we're doing this. We're not announcing anything. We're not announcing that, we have 10 new Beats headphones line ready to go or anything like that. It was just kind of like, we did this deal. We're very happy about it. What was interesting to me was that they just continue to reiterate that, like the phrase, it's all about the music. And, in that sense, it kind of like, this is Apple going back to its roots of iTunes and iPod and stuff like that. But also in the press release they sent out, 4 out of 5 of the paragraphs were about the Beats Music subscription service, not about the Beats headphones. And they will be continuing both, but it's kind of interesting to me that it really seems about the music service to them. And so, Jesse, you found a good article called The Unmentioned Perks of the Deal. Do you want to start running through some of them?
Yeah, so Jay Frank, who wrote, I should say this, that I wrote my book on the music business because I didn't think there was any good ones. I thought they were all terrible. Jay Frank's the exception to that. He's written 2 great books. One's called Future Hit DNA, which is about how music trends have changed, and then Hack Your Hit, which is about music marketing. So he consistently has a blog that writes great posts. And so this one was the unmentioned perks of the Beats Apple acquisition deal. So I thought the first one he mentioned, which was the in-app subscriptions, which I think was a really interesting point, which is that, so if you do in-app subscriptions, you have to pay Apple the 30% fee for allowing you to use their payment system to do that. Whereas if you're Rdio or Spotify and you get people to subscribe on your website, you obviously don't have to pay Apple a dime. So now with Apple owning Beats, though, that 30% becomes, a non-existent thing, and they're able to profit more off of a streaming music site, which I think is a really interesting thing.
Yeah, no, in-apps are huge. I watched a interview that Jimmy and Eddie Q did at the Recode conference last week. It was the day of the announcement, and Jimmy up front was like, well, we only have 250,000 subscribers, but we made a big mistake off the bat by not starting with in-app subscriptions. And so, they seem to greatly recognize that that's kind of a huge, point of strength for them. And, that's kind of like how the App Store works now. Just in like so many games, like games are now free or they're 99 cents. And, Candy Crush wants you to buy 800 coins for $8 because the game is maddening. But with something like in-app subscriptions for music, like we haven't really seen too many people fiddle with it yet. And, I would imagine that the best people at in-app subscriptions could be Apple since it's their platform. So it's going to be interesting just to see how that develops and how Apple takes advantage of it. And, like what the press release sort of said as well is that Apple has 800 million plus credit cards on file. And they typically, and that means all those 800 million credit cards have either bought something in the iTunes music store or on the App Store. So either way, it's kind of a really major win-win for Beats because all these people are comfortable spending money on Apple's platforms, and they're giving them a perfect and easy way to get the music they want in a better way. And that app itself is sort of blessed by Apple, obviously, since they now own it. So you may, like previously, someone may be like, oh, I know Spotify, but all of a sudden it's like, well, Apple bought Beats. I'm gonna try out Beats at least. Oh, it's only this in-app subscription purchase makes it really easy for me, et cetera, et cetera. You can see all these different ways that they can take advantage of it. And I think that's kind of great.
No, I agreed. And it's going to do them well because people are also, so much of purchasing is getting people comfortable with the system. And I think, I don't play games, so I don't see the Candy Crush side of it. But like, when I subscribe through like a service that does magazine subscriptions, it's always an app subscription, like things like that. So I'm comfortable with that and I trust that. I just really want Beats to put a new releases page on so I could actually use it.
That would be good. What was really interesting, actually, in a bad kind of way, I guess, is Eddie Q during that Recode conference said 2014, 6 months in, compared to any other year, Apple has had the least amount of new releases in their iTunes store since its launch, which is kind of like crazy, I guess.
Huh. Well, so if you want to unpack that, I could say what some of that is.
Go for it.
Aside from, being the punk rocker I am, I listen to a lot of experimental dance music. And when you're done laughing, I'll explain. So a lot of the songs that I really, really enjoy never make it to iTunes because EDM is such a big thing. I don't necessarily listen to like the Tiesto Swedish House Mafia style stuff as much as like some weirdo in his attic making some weird synth sounds that are kind of dance influenced. But a lot of these obscure genres and a lot of the like really underground stuff, and this could also go into the punk world as well, is saying, who cares about iTunes? Let's just put it on SoundCloud. Let's just put it on Beatport, or let's just put it on Bandcamp. Because it's cool to just be on Bandcamp now if you're like an obscure underground punk band from Brooklyn or some weirdo indie noise band and you don't want to be on the system. And it's the same thing with Beatport is a lot of people, or SoundCloud, is people are finding their communities there and they're just going, I don't really care about paying $50 to TuneCore every single year to do it, or even being smarter and paying $20 for as many songs as you want to put up on DistroKid. So I would posit is a good amount of it, is that we're seeing a weird underground dispersion rebellion against going to iTunes, Spotify, RDO, and all the services that get uploaded to Google Play or whatever. that's going to be my hypothesis on some of this, but I also will say I have no data to prove this. This is just pure observation of me being a nerd.
You are a nerd, but I think that's true. Like this, the SoundCloud thing is, I think, a really good point. Like that's a platform specifically, and I guess Beatboard as well, but I don't really have any firsthand experience with that. But SoundCloud is just something that, you'll see so many more things just pop up to. And I guess as long as, listeners are comfortable hitting download and figuring out how to put that into their iTunes library or whatever library they use, or maybe just the SoundCloud app, that it's no biggie. But for Apple to publicly admit that and say something's wrong is happening right now, Beats is how we're going to try to supplant that, I think is, it's an interesting thing for the company to admit, but it's also, potentially telling just how things are continually shaking out.
Yes, but I think it's also, it's, I don't want to say it's entirely bad news that this is a trend, because I think one of the things that gets lost in the conversation a lot of time is that the promise of Spotify, RDO, and Beats, or any streaming music service, is that it would get rid of torrenting. And the reason that these really, as the rumor always says, these pathetic royalty rates that you get from Spotify exist is because there's supposed to be more money that's coming to you as they get more subscribers and they get people to stop using torrents. The whole way this has happened is it's the promise of, we'll make everything so much better for you that you don't have to use torrents anymore. And so much easier. And I'm living proof of that at work. So like, even when bands I really love, if they're record leaks or somebody has it and they're offering it to me because they're trying to be cool, and I don't do it because I don't use my iTunes app pretty much at all. I just use my RDO playlists, and that's how I consume music, and I'm too lazy to do it because they've made it so easy for me. I have no interest in taking the time to go to a torrent site and download a torrent, then put it in my iTunes and do it, because they've made my life so much easier. And studies in a lot of the European countries have shown that there's a lot of people like me that are just like, I'm going to pass.
I know people like that too, and I wish I could be like that. My use case is just different because I get advances of music, and that's for my job. And so I can't just throw those in RDO. I have to use iTunes, which I'm happy to use. I don't dislike iTunes. And so then I just end up using iTunes because I don't want to be switching between 2 or 3 different applications all the time. But I feel like if I removed that part from my life, then I would just be using RDO or Beats or whatever. And I would have no problem doing that. Especially like a lot of people, I think, backhandedly and incorrectly say, I don't want to see what like my friends are listening to. I don't care. But in my circle, at least, and maybe this would also go away if I weren't getting advances, right? But like in my circle where I am, like, I think it's really interesting to see what some of my fellow people or friends or whatever are listening to, especially if it's something that I could like, just haven't found out yet.
And that's a really important point too, is that all of these people who shun Spotify, RDO, Beats are losing out on friend recommendations. Like one of the examples I make in my book is like, Johnny has a crush on Susie and he sees on Facebook in the activity bar that she's listening to Transit, let's say. He's like, oh, I'll go listen to Transit so I have something to talk to Susie about. That's huge, and it has never been so easy before. And the other thing about it is these services only work when everything's there. Like one of the reasons you still see movie torrenting be so prevalent is the movie business is not adapting the way the music business is, which is hilarious. But like, because so many movies aren't on Netflix. There's no service that just has everything that's no longer in theaters anymore, or no service that doesn't have just like an exclusive thing of like, once it's up on Apple for rental, then it's everywhere. And when that changes, yes, we'll see torrenting really, really, really go downhill, because I don't know. I know there are people who think that $7.99 or $9.99 is too much for Netflix, but I don't know any of them, and whoever they are, I imagine just hate everything and are total cynic assholes who could just complain all day anyway.
Totally. And yeah, and that's what such a benefit, I guess, of Beats or Spotify or whatever is that most everything is there unless there's that really cool person that just wants their stuff on SoundCloud that you were talking about, right? It's that there's the freedom of everything.
So that's a bad trend that could halt this. The other bad trend is I read this morning, I didn't get to get too much into it, but it looks like Amazon's going to be adding music streaming to Prime. But what's the interesting part of the contract is that all the major label releases won't go to it until they're 6 months old. So
I did see that.
Now
I did see that actually.
For 6 months when they're hearing, yeah. Obviously, that's in return for them getting a lowered royalty rate, so that they can include this in their Prime service, which I guess is going up in $20 a year for people. But yet again, this is another one of those services that for the money I pay, even if I was paying $20 more, I still think it's well worth it. But that's not good that it's going to be an incomplete library, because that's going to still keep people on the torrent sites for releases. And that's the opposite of what we should be trying to work for. But sadly, the big major labels keep pushing for this. And I should say the big major labels and Merlin, who does the negotiations for a lot of the biggest indies, they keep arguing for these silly rules when we should be really trying to figure out how we get full-fledged services that make the consumer happy, because that's what will bring money back into the music business, is having people always spending this money and having a massive subscriber base instead of having them just gain music for free.
And it is silly because I'm never going to switch to Amazon's service, right, if it doesn't have everything. And if it only has things for limited times, or it takes longer or whatever for it to get there. So even on the user end of it, it's just like, my single problem with me needing to only use iTunes is that I can't put my not on Audio music on Audio's platform. And I understand that, but that's what holds me up there. But for like Amazon is taking even more away from that for me. And it's just there's just no way, So it's interesting to sort of see all the different methods people are going to battle out for this, and ultimately who's going to win.
Yeah, I think that sadly Amazon's just banking on the people who aren't passionate enough about music to buy it, like your friend's mom who only listens to the Beatles anyway. They're hoping that service will entice her, or she, the person who hears about Imagine Dragons a year and a half after the record's been out. And they're like, oh, cool, I'll put this on. And I'm not paying $9.99 for a music service because I'm not that passionate about music. I think this just makes their platform more valuable for that. So, at the end of the day, I don't think it's a good step. But at the same time, it's probably a great idea for Amazon personally. And Lord knows they don't care about anything but themselves, as we've been seeing with the way they handle their business.
Do you have any recommendations?
I lived one of those weeks that I didn't really live much. I shouldn't say that. I had a lot of fun, but I've been reading David Lynch's book from a few years ago called How to Catch the Big Fish. And it's all about getting better at being creative and stuff like that. And I think it's an awesome read. And I've been listening to Menzinger's Rented World a whole bunch because it's a great record. And I've had it for a few months and it doesn't get old.
Man, I was going to recommend that one. I just saw them on Saturday in Philly, and it was just an incredible show. It's really, that band just is great.
They're the best guys, and from the moment, there's some bands like when I did their first record, when they walked in here, I was like, these guys have it from 2 minutes after I met it, and it's so amazing to see where they've gone.
Yeah, I would recommend, since it just got announced today, and I listened to it out of nostalgia. Census Fail announced the Let It Unfold You 10-year tour today, and that'll be happening in the fall. Knuckle Puck will be on that, which is great, but also the album I like as well.
It's horrifying to hear it's 10 years old because I know we recorded it about a year and a half before it came out. So that makes me feel really old to think that happened that long ago that we were making that record.
Think about it that way. Ooh. Well, thank everyone for tuning in. You can find more of us at offtherecord.fm. Feel free to rate us or subscribe to us on iTunes. It helps the show out a lot. And thank you to Limited Run and Card Included for sponsoring us this week.